How are questions left unresolved at the Philadelphia Convention addressed in the 14th Amendment? How are the due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment related to the principle of limited government? And when you're ready, you may begin.
In 1987, former Justice Thurgood Marshall stated that, while the Union survived the Civil War, the Constitution did not. In its place arose a new, more promising basis for justice and equality, the 14th Amendment. From its ratification in response to the Civil War, the 14th Amendment was intended to address a number of unanswered questions still lingering from the Philadelphia Convention. This included defining national citizenship for the first time.
Furthermore, basic rights were afforded to the newly emancipated slaves through the inclusion of the due process and equal protection clauses. Through such measures, the 14th Amendment placed yet another check on the capability of both the state and national governments, providing a type of national veto proposed by both James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, thus extending the intentions of the framers.
In his notes from the Philadelphia Convention, James Madison observed that many in the group thought it wrong to admit in the Constitution the idea that there could be property in men. In an effort to prevent the destruction of the tenuous Union in its infancy, the framers compromised on the 3/5 and fugitive slave clauses. After the addition of the 13th Amendment, it became apparent that this would not be enough to protect freed slaves. The 14th Amendment defines citizenship as all persons born or naturalized in the United States, thus establishing the concept of jus soli. In defining the citizen, John Bingham and other writers of the 14th Amendment attempted to return the nation to the passionate resolve of the Declaration of Independence. For if all men are created equal, then there is no justification for the arbitrary denial of citizenship.
A far more dangerous question left unanswered by the Convention regarded the relationship between state and federal governments. The Constitution attempted to resolve this issue, but a series of crises during the 19th century demonstrated how ill-defined the Federalist system truly was. The Hartford Convention and the Nullification Crisis clearly indicated the overabundant power vested in the states in early America, while the decision to go to war with the Confederacy demonstrated the potentially ruinous consequences of this, something that state-specific wording in the 14th Amendment helped to resolve.
The 14th Amendment also addressed the more immediate issues presented to the nation by the Civil War. Section 2 nullified the 3/5 clause of the Constitution while establishing punitive measures for states that did not abide by this. Section 4 of the amendment provided that any debts incurred in rebellion or through loss of slave property were illegal and void, while also declaring that the debts of the United States shall not be questioned. President Obama's recent fight to raise the debt ceiling was seen as unnecessary to some individuals. It was argued that he could have simply used this section of the 14th Amendment to bypass the debt ceiling altogether.
Another intended consequence of the amendment involved the Privileges and Immunities Clause. In response, Barron v. Baltimore, the clause attempted to begin the process of incorporation. However, after this failed in the slaughterhouse cases, the process would not be established until Gitlow v. New York, in which the Supreme Court ensured that fundamental rights embedded within the Bill of Rights would be extended to the states through the Due Process Clause. The clause provided a further check on the government's capability to deprive any person of life, liberty, and property, and limited its power over the individual.
This important aspect of the 14th Amendment has been divided into substantive and procedural rights. Procedural due process rights directly limit the government by establishing specific procedures that the government must follow, as in your Miranda rights during a custodial interview, while substantive due process rights rely on natural rights philosophy by ensuring that laws have moral backing.
Similarly, the Equal Protection Clause found its roots in the rule of law as expressed in the writings of political philosopher John Locke. It forced the government to treat each individual as equal before the law and the legislature. In the 1997 case of Gratz v. Bollinger, the Equal Protection Clause was used to strike down a University of Michigan point system that favored minority students. However, as the case of Fisher v. the University of Texas continues its hearings, that decision and its relation to the Equal Protection Clause may be struck down. Justice William O. Douglas once said that no amendment was ever put to wider or more varied use than the 14th. The amendment assures that the government does not have the capability to overstep the rights of the individual, demonstrating just how much this piece of legislation has worked to shape the great American experiment. Thank you.
Go ahead, guys.
You have no eye contact.
Yeah.
No, I can't.
I was like waiting for you to do it once and you didn't do it once. Kristen and Amanda did really good at eye contact. You did, alright.
Brent, you answer the questions?
I think so.
Did I answer the question?
I floated it, yeah.
Oh, they'd be a debater, is he?
No, you know. Yeah, no, they did. They had, they brought in like the nation, the basic purposes, which I have. And then, yeah, they answered it all. Good. You guys really expanded on the due process and equal protection clauses though.
Which is
It's
not
good.
good.
It's like, it's good, but I think that like, I don't know. I think that you repeat a lot that you said in the due process that you did in the 14th Amendment part.
Okay.
Like with the citizenship and everything and like the life, liberty, the John Locke ideas.
Okay.
You were 419
Yeah.
with some flubs. I think we can reword the debt part of the 14th, President Obama, because I think it was wordy.
Okay, and then one thing that I thought, like, John did not agree with me, but I thought that when we're talking about like the other things that it brings in, when we talk about section 2, because we go in like the 14th Amendment also addressed the more immediate issues
Right.
presented, and then we say section 2, and I feel like it's kind of like isolated within that section, because like then we go to section 4, which we relate to the President Obama thing. And
Okay.
I feel like section 2 is kind of superfluous.
I think the only thing you could, I mean, I hate adding, but the other thing you could add is that it also, and you can kind of leave it as a hanger, that it also implied men and women, or men and 21-year-olds had the right to vote to kind of keep it off its island.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We have an example of the procedural rights. Should we stick in Missouri v. Fry for substantive or something like that?
I'd have to hear it one more time.
Okay, because it's like, as in your Miranda rights during a custodial interview, well, substantive due rights, and we just don't give an
Right.
example.
We'll have to listen to it again.
I have a question about that. Did you guys run in the Miranda rights and everything? Like, I'm just like with my time off with the Miranda rights and then like the 14th Amendment, how did they connect, like you guys had said? Because you said like with the amendment rights, how the Miranda rights, how they provide a check on the government.
What's the case? Miranda.
Miranda versus Arizona,
It's not Miranda versus the United States. What the 14th Amendment do?
created incorporation.
Correct. That's how it does it.
Okay, that makes sense.
The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment incorporates the Bill of Rights of the states.
Okay,
So the Miranda, the 5th Amendment's self-incrimination now applies to state law.
okay, that makes
That's
sense.
why it applies.
That was my
Mr. Clark, what do you want people like looking when they're not reading?
Good question.
Because I think John heard me, so he was like up and down, like.
So when you guys are presenting, I mean, knowing where you're gonna be is good. Make sure you're looking at the judges, okay? Looking at who's presenting, like you all are right now, except for Brent because I can't see him. But so don't move. You guys are fine. But you don't have to be like leaning way over here. No, just kind of, and I'm kind of set back a little bit, but just kind of leaning. You know, just kind of looking at your notes.
Are we gonna be on like the little swivel chairs?
No,
Okay, so I mean, so like would it be appropriate if you kind of like turned, like angled towards
you're
the
gonna
person
be sitting at a table.
Okay, so like
together.
you wouldn't really want to like angle towards where the person is
Yeah.
reading and like watch them, or should you just stay straight?
Just stay
Do you want to
straight.
like stare down the judges? Like,
What?
I feel like it's kind of creepy when I'm sitting here, like Christina's talking and then someone's like staring me down. Like, is the judge doing wants that?
Don't be doing this. I mean, if you're not reading, don't be going.
What do you think?
Okay.
Are you giving like that awkward evil look like?
No, but it's just like, you know, kind of, as you're not reading, you kind of look at the judges, and if they catch your eye, give them a nice smile, kind of, I mean, but don't be like, okay?
I have a question. Will
Yeah.
they be able to see your legs?
No, you won't see your legs.
Oh, good. Because sometimes I absentmindedly
Yes, I know.
cross my foot.
I'm going to, if, in the past, our feet have been blocked, because we've been in a courtroom, so you couldn't see feet because it's such a big table, but I will also bring a table skirt to make sure you can't see your feet. So that,
How long is the tournament?
That problem
it starts at 9 and it'll end at 1.
Okay.
Okay.
It's not long, wow.
Are we still first?
I know I was
Yes.
expecting it to be all day, like the tournament.
All right.
Oh, there goes my
We
Saturday.
gotta set the bar.
We the people hangover.
How and why?
What?
How and why has suffrage been expanded in the United States? Why has the expansion of suffrage been controversial? How have advocates of expanding suffrage used their rights under the First Amendment to achieve their goal? When you're ready, you may begin.
In the words of Congressman John Lewis, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most important non-violent tool we have to make a difference. The United States has, since its founding, placed a great deal of importance on the citizens' right to vote.
However,
This right was never fully extended to all American citizens. As a natural response to this, minority groups throughout American history have come together and utilized their First Amendment rights to progress their standings and ultimately gain suffrage.
The prevailing idea in suffrage and classical thought was that to vote, citizens must have an economic stake in the community. These individuals were believed to be the most likely to cast informed votes and avoid the rule of the masses that the philosopher Plato and many of the founders feared so much. This idea carried over to American colonial society, where voting rights were again given exclusively to property owners. However, due to the more...
Stop, restart.
I'm sorry, I laugh
Why are you
easily.
giggling?
Because I laugh easily.
What is there to laugh?
She like looked at me and she was just like, I'm sorry, I laughed really Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Good night, Casey.
In the words of Congressman John Lewis, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most important nonviolent tool we have to make a difference. The United States has, since its founding, placed a great deal of importance on the citizens' right to vote.
However, this right was never fully extended to all American citizens. As a natural response to this, minority groups throughout American history have come together and utilized their First Amendment rights to progress their standings and ultimately gain suffrage.
The prevailing idea on suffrage in classical thought was that to vote, citizens must have an economic stake in the community. These individuals were believed to be the most likely to cast informed votes and avoid the rule of the masses that the philosopher Plato and many of the founders feared so much. This idea carried over to American colonial society, where voting rights were again given exclusively to property owners. However, due to the remarkable affordability of American land, the number of eligible voters actually increased.
The debate over suffrage proved particularly divisive during the Philadelphia Convention, and as a result, voting is mentioned only twice in the Constitution. In Article 1, regarding the election of representatives, and in the Electoral College enumerated in Article 2. Under the new Constitution, Native Americans have a status comparable to that of a foreign nation. This made Native American suffrage rights incredibly controversial. A similar situation is found in the modern debate over suffrage rights for legal immigrants and resident aliens. Like the Native Americans before them, these resident suffrage rights are constantly being questioned due to their possible standing as foreign nationals, and their protection under the Constitution is still uncertain.
Following the Civil War, voting rights of African Americans were also ill-defined by the Constitution. Despite winning freedom, citizenship, and the right to vote through the Reconstruction Amendments, African Americans still had noticeably little voter participation, due largely to Jim Crow laws which inhibited the right of suffrage for African Americans. This practice was allowed to continue because of the views on where the power to vote was derived from. Most states still saw it as their right to deny or allow the vote. This issue was at the heart of the controversy because of the lack of a consensus in states' opinions on voting rights. This debate has even continued today. The issue of voter ID laws in states such as Pennsylvania and Alabama provide multiple similarities to the literacy test.
It would take a century before African Americans finally won the right to vote freely with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which banned such tests in any state or political subdivision, and further enforced the 15th Amendment. This came about due in large part to resistance such as sit-ins, nonviolent protests, and church meetings, which were protected under the First Amendment rights to speak, assemble, and petition the government freely. The ability to assemble freely proved vital to the African American push for suffrage, as well as the later women's suffrage movement. A clear demonstration of this occurred at the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, when suffragists rallied behind leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and penned a declaration that held all men and women are created equal. This paved the way for the tsunami of suffragists that would flood the political scene 70 years later.
In the early 20th century, as the progressive movement gained popularity, women again stormed the political scene. Gaining momentum from the disappointing ruling in Minor v. Happersett, suffrage leaders actively lobbied the new, more progressive administrations. In addition, as the nation prepared to enter World War I, the lack of women's suffrage made the plea for universal democracy far less legitimate. In the words of famed suffragist Alice Paul, "We women tell you that America is not a democracy, not when 20 million women are denied the right to vote." The continuous petitioning and lobbying of the suffragists, coupled with the American love of democracy, ultimately resulted in the creation of another right, the women's right to vote.
Since 1978, the state of Nevada has included an option on the ballot that allows voters to cast their ballots in favor of none of the above. The intent behind this measure was to expand the vote as a means of expression to encompass the right not to vote for any candidates, demonstrating how this precious right has evolved consistently throughout American history. Whether these changes have occurred to correct the mistakes of the past or to simply allow the disenfranchised to have a voice, The expansion of suffrage is yet another aspect of the perpetual journey to work to form a more perfect union. Thank you.
Feedback.
I feel like you guys don't really address how the First Amendment, like, was used. Like, I mean, I can understand because you're like, well, they petitioned it, they protested it and everything, but the only time I heard First Amendment was when you said it.
The first or second time.
The second time you talked. Like, all of your other ones with, like, the sit-ins and the nonviolent protests and everything, like, that can go into how it was expanded because of their actions, but you don't back it up with how the First Amendment applied to it.
Okay.
I think you do. Because if you know what the First Amendment is, it implies sit-ins and protests.
Well, yeah, but they don't specifically say, like, anything with the First Amendment, like that.
really need to specifically say.
I mean, I guess, like, we'll have educated judges and, like, a debate if you say something, you're like, what's that mean? So, I mean, I'm sure that they'll understand that, so.
You guys like, yours was better for your first term, but your second term, it wasn't as good. Like, you don't do pretty good. Except when you started being like, that was weird.
I was gonna bring that up. When I get nervous, I do that. So like, I'm afraid of the
What do you
competition.
have to do to make you not laugh?
I just like start breaking.
Can I just
Like,
slap
Can you
her across
can you
the
pin,
face?
can you pinch yourself and stop
Crying or
and stop
something?
laughing?
You feel
It's,
comfortable.
it's more about like breathing for me.
Oh, okay.
So just trying to.
It's gonna be like,
Just start hyperventilating and all the things.
Because like for me, if I pinch myself, I'll stop. I'll catch myself.
Oh really?
Yeah,
I like
Yeah, I'll
biting
try.
inside of my lip.
yeah. But it's hard to do when you're reading.
Yeah.
True.
But I mean, if anything,
Just,
just
like, scratch yourself.
See, like if I feel giggly like before I go in, I'm just like,
Therefore.
it's like under
I
the
just,
table.
I just wanted to make it to the end of my section, and I was trying to like rush ahead, but oh my god, I think I.
take a deep breath. Be focused. Other comments?
I felt like you guys were more natural and not as like, you were just more natural this time, which was better. The eye contact was not weird. It was just like, normal and good.
The
So,
wording, I
Mine
can
is
tell the
laughing.
wording. The wording is awesome in your guys' testimony. Very educated wording.
Oh, thank you.
No, like really, I was like listening to it, and you're like, in Nevada, they can vote in favor of the no, none of the above, and with us, we're like, Nevada ballots have the none of the above option at the top. So like, just your wording.
What time was that?
409.
Oh gosh, we cut down.
I think we can cut one more sentence somewhere in there and
Okay.
get it closer.
There's a couple
In
things I wanted to get rid of.
terms of like hand gestures, can we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Use your hands.
Yeah.
Don't be nervous with your hands. Use your hands.
All right.
Be Italian.
When you're reading it?
Yeah.
I thought you were supposed to.
Well, but if you're the type of person who can hold it and you got the motion, you with hey, how's it going? It's okay.
From its beginning in 17th century British law.
Well, this isn't a rap album, okay?
Nice try.
All right.
Can we just like throw it up and like cite the whole paragraph?
We got this.
All right. Anything else? All right, last one. What are the major arguments for and against judicial review? Alexander Hamilton claimed in Federalist Number 78 that the interpretation of the laws is the proper peculiar province of the courts. Do you disagree? Why? What are the advantages and disadvantages of an appointed, life-tenured branch of government overturning laws passed by a democratically elected body of government? When you're ready, you may begin.
In the 1803 case, Marbury v. Madison, Chief Justice John Marshall declared that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Even though the idea of judicial review was alluded to in Article 3, Section 2, the power was never specifically enumerated within the Constitution. This cornerstone of constitutional interpretation ensures that the judicial branch of government has a viable check against the other branches and allows the courts to act as a type of moral compass by attempting to return the nation to the fundamental beliefs expressed in the Constitution.
From its beginning in 17th century British law, judicial review became an assumed power of the courts and was even being used in multiple states at the time of writing the Constitution. However, judicial review wasn't universally accepted. A group consisting mainly of anti-federalists disputed this power, believing that it would give far too much power to a group of individuals who were not necessarily infallible, and according to Anti-Federalist Paper number 80, will operate to a total subversion of the state judiciaries, if not to the legislative authority of the states. This view was later expressed by Franklin Roosevelt when he attempted to check the court's power with his court-packing scheme.
Roosevelt justified his actions by claiming that we have reached the point as a nation where we must take action to save the Constitution from the Supreme Court. Partisanship also contributes significantly to this debate. The recent over-politicization of the court has resulted in deep party lines and a group of people meant to be above petty politics. In one of the more maligned decisions by the court, the justices followed exact party lines and ruled 5-4 in Citizens United v. FEC.
Although the Supreme Court did not explicitly declare its authority on constitutional interpretation until its ruling on Cooper v. Aaron, the legacy set forth by Marbury was present in several of the most prominent cases of the 19th century. Many of these cases, however, bring to light issues with court power as a whole. For example, the polarizing case of Dred Scott v. Sanford, the Taney Court ruled that the Missouri Compromise that would have made Dred Scott a citizen was unconstitutional because African Americans could not be citizens of the United States. The idea that the Taney Court's poor decision permanently reflected the views and laws of an entire country was ludicrous enough to prompt President Abraham Lincoln to question the decision of Dred Scott in his first inaugural address.
Though Alexander Hamilton's declaration that the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts remains historically accurate, the benefit of said historical accuracy is not necessarily present. In actuality, the dynamic multi-branch effects of the Constitution, constitutional interpretation seems to imply a far more inclusive impact. In his book, The Partial Constitution, Harvard law professor Cass Sunstein said, "The Constitution's meaning to Congress, the President, state government, and citizens in general it has been more important than its meaning within the narrow confines of the Supreme Court building."
In Article 3, Section 1, the Constitution provided for a set of justices who held their offices during good behavior, a statement long taken to imply a life term. This policy was largely in reaction to the tyrannical policies of King George III, who, according to the Declaration of Independence, made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices. Conversely, many have come to see the court itself as having become an unelected tribunal presiding over democratically elected bodies, a situation which has constantly led to the untenable emergencies within the court, especially considering the immense power of judicial review.
In 2005, Chief Justice William Rehnquist was diagnosed with an invariably fatal form of thyroid cancer. Despite his condition, he insisted upon keeping his job until his death in September of that year, leading many scholars to question whether the decisions he made while essentially on his deathbed were in good faith, or if they had, as Texas law professor Sanford Levinson declared, a degree of egotistic narcissism. Few other bodies outside of the federal government use the life tenure system, and this is due mainly to proposals such as the 1940 Missouri Plan, which effectively eliminated life tenure by putting judges up for retention elections after 1 year of serving.
Currently, 49 of the 50 states elect their judges, further proving Levinson's statement that there is not the slightest need to grant life tenure in order to guarantee an independent judiciary. In addition, the concept of life tenure itself has changed. The average life expectancy since 1900 has increased by 30 years, showing how this practice is no longer viable or pursuant to the philosophies of the framers. Thank you.
You guys seem way more nervous on that one.
Can't talk.
I don't know why.
Yeah, that was our first one? No, second.
Third one.
No, I mean like the one tomorrow.
Oh, they did.
Oh.
They did a lot. Tawny Court.
I just didn't know what it was, so I was like, what? Maybe it's talking about.
Yeah, they did it. It's
Okay.
Tawny.
Tawny?
Tawny.
What did I say?
Tanny.
I did?
Yes.
What
Tawny. How was eye contact?
It was pretty good. Casey's got a little worried on the last one, but everyone else was pretty decent.
How many times are you supposed to look up?
Well, it's just like
The whole time
You're supposed
is
to memorize
preferable.
Christina and me.
Memorize it.
Yes.
When they look up, they don't look up like just like briefly, like John kind of just goes like this. They like talk to you and like they'll have a whole sentence. So they're like la 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 la.
I've like memorized it.
Yeah.
But like that's
What
when
I
I
do
do it
is I
like
just
this.
memorize at least like the first sentence that I have because I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I say like memorize. John, when you do it, you read your sentence and you say the last maybe like 3 letters, look up, pause, and then start reading. Like you don't actually read anything while looking up, you just take a breath.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'll wait.
So if you could just get like
If you
2
make a
words
That's
little
because I haven't
memorized.
memorized it yet.
That's okay.
So.
Like I don't have mine memorized, I just have a few key words memorized so I can look up for like 3 or 4 words and then back down, and that seems to work pretty well.
now that we are getting better and our things aren't changing very much, this is when you go in your bathroom, you shut the door. It sounds funny, and you read. And you look in the mirror in your bathroom as you read. Because the reverberation in your bathroom, the acoustics, is different than any other place in your house. And it bounces back and you can hear yourself talk.
That's why it sounds good when you sing.
Okay? So, you use that and then you look in the mirror and you make your eye contact, or you make notes where you should maybe make an eye contact, and that's how you continue to get better. Okay? 432, by the way.
Yeah, that was expected though, because we kind of messed up.
Okay.
We had a lot of changes in
Yep.
What's the max, like where they'll just cut the law?
405.
Judicial.
Really?
You don't. You want to be no more than 405.
Judicial.
We got 11.
Yes.
There's
We'll have to work on it.
judicial.
Oh man.
All right.
So it's better to
Alright,
be
can you
like
help us?
a little under 4 minutes?
It's back and forth. I mean, it's hit or miss either way.
Another one.
Can you help us with that? Cause like
Yes.
it helped a lot on that.
Yes, I will. All right. Switch.